better late than never, as we say in our local cliches all the time. Iran internal auditors risk 5 years in jail, that's according to the Director General. And then we have new voters register. NDC petitions Parliament over Ghana card. There's a big issue about that constitutional instrument, that draft that's supposed to be before Parliament, and we know that the minority had raised issues before it. We have a key member of the minority right here. I'll ask him a question or two on the subject. It's about a main election. When we're confronted with difficulties in the economy, so those take precedence over many other discussions. On the front page, we do have of the Ghanaian Times. Ghana's HIV infections hit 21,000 annually in the last 5 years. Well, so the economy is hitting us hard. We also have to avert our minds to some of these public health concerns. Up there, 4 dead, 9 injured in road crash on the Mankasim Apam Road, Apam. NDC petitions Parliament over Ghana card sole registration document. And this is for continuous registration, according to what the Electoral Commission has explicitly explained over the period. It's subsequently for new people who want to get onto the register. Very important for all of us to put that into perspective. Take action to end Galamsey permanently. It's also on the front page. Now let's go to the Finder. Has on the front page imports of 20 items valued at $10 billion annually. Tin tomatoes, $1 billion. Rice, $800 million. Flour, $600, but we know that this has been hit hard with the Ukraine-Russia war. Poultry and meat, $400 million. I have a flag bearer hopeful, an energy expert also on the panel this morning. He will have a lot to say about this as well as key main advisors of government's economic management team right there. Let me do the last one, is the Daily Guide. The Daily Guide has on the front page Akufo-Addo, we're talking about Bomti, or the brother of the president, Edward Akufo-Addo, testifies against 4, and it's a case involving Mensa Thompson, you know him of ASEPA, as well as a Clash Media Group and an individual journalist who's also practicing in there. Court also threatens to free Aisha Wang, accomplices. Kukiti had raised the issue. The judge said that, well, we couldn't find interpreters in Chinese and Vietnam anywhere. The last time they wanted somebody to do the interpretation in Vietnam, they had to go to the School of Language. I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, we need to avail some of these resources to the court. Now, let me just do the introduction. Energy experts also hoping to lead the MPP into the 2024 general elections as its flag bearer. And we have Kojo and Safwa Poku, a great man, has always contributed to many subjects of socio-economic dimensions in our country, especially when it comes to the oil and gas sector, energy. He's the man that you always trust. He's been crisscrossing across the country, and I think his views also will come in very handy this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, my brother Roland. How are you?
I'm fine, Honorable. Incoming.
Thank you.
And then also great advisor to government's economic management team. He assists also the vice president in many respects. He's a member of the Tano North constituency of our republic. That seat currently is in the hands of the governing New Patriotic Party. And Dr. Gideon Boakum, I'm honored to have you, sir.
Hi, Roland.
How are you, sir?
It's been a while.
Yeah, been a while. I saw pictures of you at least interacting with some market women in your constituency, so I knew that you were in touch really. You're just not sitting in the office or in Jubilee House just yabbing. You're doing the right things, getting in touch.
That's my best.
Yes, and we're going to get all those interactions as well. And one of the key people in the minority in Parliament had his constituency conducting their elections, and I'm sure was also on the grounds. Roxy Nelson Dapamokbo, he's a legal practitioner, member of Parliament for Southdown. Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, nice having you as well. Yeah, saw you writing some billions in there. I hope that you haven't invested in some of those instruments and raising concerns about haircuts, etc. Please make sure that when you're joining us on TV3 Ghana, you're always adding the hashtag TV3 New Day. When you do that, it also helps us, and add hashtag joining user, etc. But let me start with you. Dr. Boako, yes. Are you done pressing? Oh, great. More information. This clarification that after the president has spoken about haircuts, we've had the information minister come in, and then other people. But we speak to many investors in many of government's instruments in the market, and they seem to suggest otherwise, that they've been getting some messages from banks. I mean, can we just allay their fears? When we say haircuts and there will be no haircuts, what do we mean?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning to our viewers. Basically, the terminology haircut, it's applied in circumstances like this, in the financial sector, in which bankers or, let's say, financial intermediaries take a decision to kind of reorganize the debt portfolio of the institution, which obviously affects their creditors. In other words, you and I, who deposit monies with the institutions, and it also applies to different organizations and governments. And when government decides to pursue a course that appears to be the case for Ghana in these present circumstances, and you decide to do that reprofiling, debt restructuring. Don't forget, the issue of debt reprofiling is something that we've done before. I remember when this government came into office in 2017, there was the need to change the tenor of some of our existing debt, to move them from short-dated, debt to long-dated debt, so that government could have the breathing space to do other things whilst taking time to, pay off the debt that it had inherited. That reprofiling kind of gave us a lot of space in the budget to do other things and helped. In our present circumstances, it does appear that looking at where we are with our debt portfolio, of course, it's built up for over time to where we are. There is the need for government to do some kind of debt restructuring, debt profiling, and all of that. And in the process, what appears to be very clear is the fact that the restructuring may not just be a matter of changing short-dated, short tenor debt obligations to long tenor, but there will be some broad restructuring. And that is what people have been thinking, exercising their minds on. How is the restructuring going to be? Who and who are going to get affected? And what will be the level of the restructure? We are not there yet, but there had been some speculations in the market, on the minds of people who participate in the financial environment, especially buy government securities, treasury bills, government bonds, and all of that. And they wanted some clarity as to how the restructuring is going to be. Some information had been put out, undertones, and people were saying there's going to be haircut. And
which people?
The Ghanaian society, all of us, because everybody wanted information, and the people want to be clear.
Because of the uncertainty.
Exactly, because of the uncertainty. So we want to know how the haircut is going to be. If there's going to be a haircut, is it going to affect treasury bills? Is it going to affect government bonds? And all of that. And that kind of speculation has really, really affected the economy, because you saw these mad rush, quote unquote, for dollar assets and hard currency dollar and all of that, because people were not sure if their investments in government were going to be affected, and therefore why don't I go and liquidate and go and buy dollars and all of that. So I think the president's statement, and that was an emphatic statement after cabinet meeting. I'm sure cabinet met on Thursday to Saturday, and then Sunday the president gave that communication. So that emphatic statement from the president really was apt to say that there is not going to be any haircut on treasury bills, because I think that is what people's concern were, that are my treasury bills going to be affected? The president has given that clear indication that if you had any doubt or any fears that government was going to touch your treasury bills, kind of give you a haircut to say that if you have X amount of money in your treasury bills, maybe this part is going to go, and then you're left with that.
We've had a situation where there are many individuals, including myself, as well as others who have invested in government securities, in which messages have been sent about extension of the maturity dates of those securities other than the dates that you were given at the time you bought them by individual banks. I mean, that's out of your control. Is it also part of the debt restructuring or making sure that we have a certain hand on the markets? We've had also a number of messages sent to customers of banks. I've seen one from Fidelity, I've seen one from one of my banks, GT Bank, and then also there's one from EcoBank. And this one from EcoBank to its investors or customers, you go to paragraph 2. Okay, it says, this means the value of bonds, government and non-government, held in the EDC Ghana Fixed Income Fund and other collective investment schemes have declined. However, this decline is realized only when the bonds and other assets are sold. On the contrary, the full value on the bonds is realized when they are held to maturity. Indeed, the more our unit holders request to exit the fund by way of redemptions, the more we have to sell some of these bonds to be able to process the redemptions. And they are promising that when you hold all these investments till maturity, before now, if I want to liquidate, of course, there's some penalty to it. So there'll be some losses. But for those who have invested high amounts of money in some of these instruments, they are getting cuts, not only affecting their interests and eating into their principals. That is a concern. Is it? No. Can't we situate that in the conversation of haircuts?
No, you know, in the bond market, there are features of every bond once it is issued. I don't know.
And these are government bonds.
I'm coming.
And some are non-government bonds.
Before you buy a bond, there's always a bond prospectus. And you have to read the prospectus well, whether or not there's a callable feature, a call feature, or there's no call feature. Now, if the bond has a callable feature, it means that at any point in time before maturity, you are allowed to call the bond without any penalty. If it does not have that feature, and at any point before the maturity you want to call the bond, it has to be discounted. There should be some kind of penalty you need to pay before the maturity. And the statement, you rather haven't seen it, but what it means is that they are indicating that if you want to call your bond before the maturity, the price will have to be lower. But those who are able to hold it to maturity will realize the full value of the bond. So these are features, but a lot of the time when we are buying some of these, we don't read the prospectus well. But these are features that are always in the bond prospectus document. And so depending on the features of the bond as at the time you bought it, some of these things may apply. But let me say that as it stands, government has not taken any such decision that these things should happen. So a colleague of mine drew my attention to a statement that the Securities and Exchange Commission issued yesterday.
Yes, they also issued one.
I haven't read that. But they have, but basically what he was trying to tell me is that the Securities and Exchange Commission is also trying to protect those who keep their funds till the maturity period. And some of these things are there. But from government side, the only communication that I'm privy to is what the president has given. And government has given clear indication that whoever has government bills, like 191 day, 82 day, 181 day treasury bill, is not going to be affected by any haircuts. after the negotiations with the IMF, and I'm sure by the time the finance minister presents the budget or even post that, the totality of how government debt restructuring is going to be will be laid out. But I think the president kind of sought to allay the fears of people and also make an announcement even before that time. And the key thing that people were concerned about is whether or not there's going to be a haircut on the principal of their treasury bills. And that is certainly clear from government, said by the president, no other person than the president, that treasury bill holders are not going to have their principal affected by any sort of haircut. And that communication is clear.
All right. I'll come out to ask you a question, though. But this lays to bear the bigger conversation about the confusion in the minds of the market. Perhaps we needed this address earlier than before.
Well, for me, I would have hoped that the president stayed away from that conversation.
Why?
Because, look, why did we go to IMF? IMF didn't come to us. We went to IMF. Why did we go to IMF? We need physical space. Government needs to basically breathe. The economy is choked. So the IMF now tells you, IMF does two things. They help you with some finances over a period, but they are not Father Christmas. They lend you the money, and they have to find a way that the money they are giving you to sustain you during your difficult times, IMF will be able to get it back. So IMF is saying that because you are choked, before I can give you my money, whether 3 billion or over a period, how do I get my money back? So you need to also find physical space, what my brother is calling debt restructuring. So you need to look at your housekeeping. What do you put where? Okay? So one of the options, as my brother again mentioned that we did that in 2017, we did some restructuring which gave government physical space. So breathing space for you to restructure your debt, make some longer tenure so you can have space to do other things. So one of the things on the table is this restructuring of what people are calling haircuts. I've taken so much money from the local market. We have been taking about 1.3 billion a week since January. Every week we take about 1.3 billion. And by maturity, you might not be able to pay it off. So one of the things on the table that you are discussing or you need to present is to look at that option to say that, can I restructure, make some of the shorter bond longer tenure to give me space to breathe, to give me space to do other things. But if the president now come and make this statement that there will be no haircut or discounting, then it takes that option off the team of the negotiating team. So if they go
because it's one of the options when you have to.
It
may be the lowest in terms of consideration.
It doesn't matter what it is,
but it's one of the
it depends
options.
It depends on the numbers, and maybe the economic management team have done the numbers, and they feel that they might not want that option, and they will go for other options. But what that will now make is that if government cannot touch that, then they have to touch other things. So when we now have the IMF document, we will now know what we are touching. We now keep hearing this thing, and it keeps coming. And my brother repeated it. Principal, principal, principal. Look, if you leave the person's principal and renegotiate his interest, you've still given him a haircut. If you elongate his tenure and do not give him the interest over that same tenure, you've given him a haircut.
Which is happening currently.
Well, I'm just telling you what the situation is. I sit on a board of a lot of investment banks. So the point is this. If you are looking at options of getting yourself to breathe, and the president comes and makes this emphatic statement, it really ties the hand of the negotiators around their back because it takes some of the options available to them off the table. So for me, my thought would have been that in the president's statement, he would have basically stayed out of that statement and let the negotiators negotiate, and then let's see what the final statement would have been from the IMF. But as it is now, it means that one of the things that government can look at, maybe, as we keep hearing the principal, we are going to assure them the principal, but if I offered you 30% interest, then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to now try to renegotiate that 30% interest and say, look, my brother, I offered you 30% when I bought this bond. Let me now, the interest I'm supposed to pay you on maturity, let me now split that over a period for you to pay. So naturally, what that person would have taken his money for today, you are telling him that instead of the 30% that I'm giving to you, I'll give that 30% to you over a period, let's say 4 or 5 months. If you restructure that and the cedi is not stable, right? And the cedi keeps depreciating, then that money that you are giving the person when you're not giving a bullet payment but structuring that period over a time doesn't come back to him at the same nominal value. So that is where people are worried.
Look, the reality is the government is hard up. The president says your principals will not be affected. And we've seen...
No, the president didn't say that. The president said there will be no haircut, but other commentators have said that.
No. We've had explanation. For example, we had an interaction with the information minister. He's trying to explain further what... And Dr. Gideon Boakwe is also here to do that further explanation. The reality is that there are many options that we need to take by way of restructuring our debt. We need to create the space. We also need to make sure that we create the discipline. We'll talk about that, where ideally we should have been cutting costs, etc. How does this communication tend to give comfort to, for example, yourself, your constituents, and the ordinary Ghanaian?
First of all, good morning to Kwejuru and Dr. Boako. And of course, my constituents in Southern, Peki, Kwali, Kwevetongo.
The name of the constituency?
The Southern, with the traditional areas. Peki, Kwali, Kwevetongo. The difficulty I have with government is that government is not being candid with us. It's not being truthful with us.
How do you mean?
You see, government came to parliament sometime in 2017 and hinted about the difficulties they had inherited. And so they needed fiscal space to be able to undertake the vision of the new government. Parliament agreed. What did they do? They restructured a lot of the debt portfolios, like they are saying. Government then got bitter and went on a borrowing spree. Between 2017 and now, government has borrowed in excess of 350 billion minus tax revenue. People are asking, what has these monies been applied to? Any feasible income generating venture? That aside, we ran ourselves into problems again sometime in 2021. So government came back again to parliament and said that this year will be tough. So they needed to introduce E-levy amongst other innovative revenue generation models. We did the quantitatives, we ran the analysis. We cautioned government that if you introduce that, you were going to rather have adverse implication for that subsector of the economy. Government won't listen. The minority was bastardized for trying to stand its ground. So eventually on Thursday, 24th of March, the finance minister read to this country, to this nation, a plethora of things that he thinks that they must do to be able to resuscitate the economy. He called it the immediate measures, the economic measures to revive the economy. I didn't say so, he said so. If you read his opening paragraph of that statement, if you go to page 2, paragraph 2 and 3 of that statement, this was what he said. I am here today to announce to you measures to address the economic difficulties we are facing due mainly to recent global domestic events. These difficulties have manifested in 1. Rising fuel prices, 2. Rising inflation and cost of living, 3. Exchange rate depreciation, 4. Rising interest rates, and 5. Revenue mobilization challenges. If we go quickly to paragraph 23 of that statement, he then rolled out a lot of measures that the government considered after its Pedroasi meeting, cabinet retreat, leading to that statement on the 24th. I think the retreat happened between the 18th to about the 21st, and then on the 23rd, they came back to Accra to finalize leading to his release of his statement on the 24th, Thursday. He says measures to address the challenges, and he zoomed in straight. Discretionary spending is to be further cut by an additional 10%. 2. These times call for very efficient use of energy resources. He said in line with this, there will be 50% cut in fuel coupon allocations for all political appointees and heads of institutions. 3. Government has imposed a complete moratorium on the purchase of imported vehicles. 4. With immediate effect, government has imposed a moratorium on all foreign travels, except pre-approved critical statutory travels. 5. Government will conclude ongoing measures to eliminate ghost workers from the government payroll. 6. Government will conclude renegotiation of the energy sector IPP's capacity charges. That's your area. Government will also impose a moratorium on establishment of new public sector institutions. 7. Government will prioritize ongoing public projects over new projects. 8. Government will reduce expenditure on all meetings and conferences by 50%. Then 10. Finally, Cabinet has approved ministers and the heads of SOEs to contribute 30% of their salaries and all that. Now, this was in March. Let me say late March. So I expect that the positive effects of these measures will begin to take effect from about April this year. 6 months down the line, we have the president himself coming out to again introduce or mention measures to revive the economy. My question is, has Cabinet evaluated the measures they themselves introduced from April this year? Because you see, if you introduce measures and you don't evaluate them, then there's no way you can set in new measures. So government should be telling us that when they said that they will cut down, there's a freeze on foreign travels, they complied. But I can tell you that it never happened. When they said that there's a freeze on importation of new vehicles or the purchase of new vehicles for state institutions, it never happened. When government said that they were going to prioritize public projects over new ones, ongoing public projects over new ones, it hasn't happened. Because they've started new projects. I've seen the president commission between April and now over 15 new projects.
They are not new projects. There was
cut short.
There were projects.
No. What I mean, not commission, but cut short to start new projects, much against your own policy measure. When government said that there will be a 10% cut in expenditure, public expenditure, we expect some explanation in respect of what constitutes that 10%. We are never told. Indeed, I filed a question regarding the 30% expenditure cut right from the beginning of the year as part of the measures. The finance minister has not been able to answer that question, even though it's been admitted and remitted to his office.
What did you want to know, Dr. Gideon?
Because if you say that you are reducing your projected expenditure by 30% to bring it down from 140 billion to about 110 to around your projected revenue level was 100 billion. I need to know what you are cutting. I need to know which areas are going to suffer the cuts. He hasn't told us. So if you say those things and we don't see those things being implemented actually, then when the president says there will be no haircut, I have my doubts. In any case, should not giving people a haircut an economic measure? When I have signed an agreement with the state that I will invest my money at a certain premium. Indeed, before, as soon as you purchase a treasury bill, your interest is paid ahead of time. As soon as you purchase it, they credit you with the interest.
Over the last one?
Yes. No, they credit you with the interest.
Yes.
It's only your principal.
Over the last one, they've stopped.
Hold on. It's only your time. You bid your time. If it's 91 days, you bid your time. When the 91 days is up, you either plow back or you take your money. But as soon as you purchase, the bank will credit you with their projected interest level. So I have a problem government mentioning that as an economic measure, when indeed the haircut is a colloquialism for people losing their investments. It is nothing but colloquialism for saying that if you invest, we are in a financial crisis, so your financial instrument is losing value. So it is nothing different from what they came to say where the financial sector was in crisis, they came to clean it up. Kojo, that too, I've been asking questions. That when you have a projected investment portfolio of a sector valued at around 10 billion, 9 billion, 10 billion, they themselves have put the figures out. And yet, over a period of 4 years, you've spent in excess of 25 billion, claiming that that was all used to clean up the sector, when indeed there are still people whose investments are locked up, have not been paid. How did you apply the 25 billion? 25 billion at the time was equivalent of $3 billion. 25 billion. It's about $5 billion. So assuming that you apply 2 billion to cover the portfolio, if anybody siphon $3 billion from any economy, there will be consequences. I've been asking, what exactly did we spend 25 billion on? Who were the consultants? How much did we pay them? What did they do? What kind of document did they draft? What kind of advice did they give? So much we spent, so that we spent 25 billion on that. Even then, the crisis is not over. Today, we restructured our debt externally and domestically 5 years ago. We've come full circle. We are still talking about debt restructuring. When government gets a breather again, they will go on another borrowing spree. So the problem that they have is that when the president says something, then others will want to come and now explain.
Okay.
So the haircut is happening. It is happening. People are having their monies and investments taken away.
He's here explaining. So now the
doctor is incapacitated.
No, he's not.
He's incapacitated. He can't explain that.
He's very able.
He's incapacitated. He can't explain that.
If
he's trying to justify
if restructuring is on the table, you were in Washington.
No.
You were not there. Hey, this is serious.
They didn't take him.
No, but
you are clothed with everything.
So many actors in
government, and all of us have to
you
do
were not in
different
Washington.
things.
Seriously. Okay. So,
my colleagues were there.
No,
I didn't have to
that's
be
okay.
there.
That's okay. That's okay. I also ask a question because you are fully clothed. If debt restructuring is on the table, we're meeting the IMF. They're coming back into town when?
I think maybe in a week or 2 weeks.
Okay. You are thinking maybe in a week or two. The president is promising us point 12 of the 12 pointers. No haircuts as far as treasury bills are concerned and other government instruments, of course. Which other debt restructuring procedures are we looking at? Strategies?
Yeah, thank you, Roland. But before I come to that, 1 or 2 issues have been raised that need to be polished some way. You know, it's so easy for anybody, and particularly in countries where we practice multi-party democracy, for political parties that are not in government, say opposition parties, to try to take advantage of dire economic situations. It's normal politically, but I dare say that we ought to be measured and careful the information we put out to people. And here we are today, people even questioning why the president had to talk about haircut in his presentation. Unless the president was not sensitive to the happenings in the country, because one of the major issues that people were bothered with was the whole issue about haircuts. And those of us in government sitting on the books and looking at the data saw how the impact of that news had on the finances of the nation. Okay, so don't let us play to the gallery because of politics. It was very, very necessary for government to clarify whether or not people's investments were going to suffer under the debt restructuring by way of haircut. That is what the president did. The other issue that we need to be careful about, this whole thing about E-levy, you also, yes, admittedly, E-levy's expectation was not met. How my government decided to realize was not met. We all saw what happened leading to that. Because of the brouhaha in Parliament, government had to revise the position as had earlier been envisaged.
Because the strategy for deployment was wrong.
No, as had earlier been envisaged. As I speak with you today, about 70 to 80% of people who participate in the E-levy space are not taxed. Talking about merchant-to-merchant transaction, that constitutes about 70 to 80% of the E-levy transaction. You and I, that is where we all go. They are not charged. That in itself has taken about 70 to 80% of the revenue that government had earlier envisaged to get from E-levy. And why did government take such a decision? Government took such a decision because it felt at the point from Parliament and all of that, people were complaining. And so government said, okay, I'm taking this cluster of people out of the E-levy. So it was as a result of government listening to the people and losing money. You cannot come today when you have a government that listens to the hues and cries of people and take them out of a certain tax bracket, and government loses money and complain that government was not able to
well, government in the policy implementation was not
you don't do that.
Broadly in consulting stakeholders.
No, that's
not. We wouldn't have been where we are currently
that's not
without tax handle.
That's not true. It's politics, okay? And how emotional we do our partisan politics in this country, throwing away the common good. I mean,
Dr. Gideon, are you saying that the non-successful implementation or realization of revenue from E-levies as a result of the politicking that is happening in Ghana?
If you ask me 1,000 times, that is
NDC caused E-levy not to succeed?
I don't know whether it is NDC or whatever.
But you're saying politics. The main opposition party in Parliament is the NDC.
In government's original plan, merchant-to-merchant transactions were going to be taxed because of the noise and the discussions and the debates and the hold up in Parliament. You understand that we won't pass it. You saw how government went back and forth with the minority.
Because government failed to consult, Dr. Gideon.
No, it's not true. It's not true.
Who did you consult?
You want us to go back to the E-levy?
No, we don't want to go back.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not true. The minority felt because of the strength of their numbers, they have to torpedo the whole thing. And government had to sit back and say, okay, let's listen. Let's take this out of the tax. And that was taken out. And today, nobody is even talking about that. About 70 to 80% of people who had transactions that had originally been factored into the E-levy taxation was taken out.
It's not impressed.
I'm not. You see, when you want to put the facts out, it's not everybody who will be happy with it, and that's fine.
No, what you're saying is not facts, because it was a public discussion.
No, what I'm saying is
and government was clearly criticized for implementing a policy for which the plea from the states, as well as stakeholders, including all of us sitting here, and then also stakeholders, okay, was that the pre-deployment aspect of that policy, which involved broad consultation of stakeholders, was poorly undertaken. Why is it that after the E-levy was passed, it was when we had the finance minister, the rest of ministers of government, and I'm sure including you in part, were going on a roadshow in all the regions?
Listen to me. Whatever it is, whether you think there was no broader consultation or whatever, your understanding, my understanding, and the understanding of the generality of Ghanaians. I'm summing this up. I'm not saying individually all of us agreed.
Please sum up and answer the strategy for the restructuring for debt.
I'm not saying individually all of us agreed to everything at some point. The totality of the discussions caused government to sit back, reflect, okay, and say that, let me take merchant-to-merchant transactions off the E-levy platform. And I'm telling you today that space that was created constitute about 70 to 80% of the total revenue that government ought to have realized from E-levy. That is not tax. So technically, because of your concerns, my concerns, government had to take that one out. So it means technically that how much government was going to get from E-levy had been had fallen short of about 70%. That is the argument I'm trying to make here. So you don't turn around to say, oh, because you didn't get the total value of what you wanted, you had failed.
My question.
Let's understand that. And then just before that, the issue about cuts. I don't know whatever details the honourable member wants that he cannot get through the processes in Parliament. I have had my salary cut by 30% ever since the finance minister made that announcement. I feel it. My salary since then has been cut. I have friends, a friend of mine, DC, called me last week and was complaining. His salary had been cut 30% ever since. Okay? So when you sit down and you say, oh, they said they are going to cut, it's not to those of us who have been affected. I'm telling you, Roland, you know I'm your friend. My salary has been cut by 30% since then. You understand? So if you need information, in Parliament, you can put the question across and get everything answered. Now, on the substantive question that you asked, of debt restructuring. You see, debt restructuring, it's a whole big package. Please,
let him answer.
Please. Debt restructuring
is a very key person in the discussion.
Entails a lot. There are several components of debt restructuring. Like I said, it's not as if this is the first time any government in Ghana is doing such a thing. You can decide to reprofile, do restructuring from long-dated to short-dated, short-dated to long-dated. The issue about haircut, the issue about debt standstill, all of them are also there. But what has become topical, and government has not yet concluded the whole issue of debt restructuring with the IMF. That's not it. But the president needed to address a pressing and urgent issue that had been brought out from the whole concept of debt restructuring. You understand what I mean? And that is why the president had to comment on the haircut, because it is what was on the table. And people were discussing, people were confused, people were worried. And so any sensitive president will have to address that. And that's why the president spoke to it. Now, you were asking me what other things will be involved in the debt restructuring. As I sit here, I may not know.
You don't know?
Yes, because the discussion is not yet concluded. And it will be very, very unwise, quote unquote, on the part of any government to come out and speculate, suggest things that are not yet concluded. But I think the key thing that the government felt we were in agreement on, that could be communicated, and that was also very urgent and dear to the people, was the haircut. And the president did so well by arriving at a decision on the table with all the actors and the stakeholders to say that whatever the debt restructuring takes, I am not going to allow
the concern is that
the investment of my people
in the semblance of haircut is taking place in the market with those who are holding government.
That is not coming from...
But you are saying those are peculiar to the terms and conditions.
Exactly.
Of
and let's take it. That is not coming from government. It's peculiar to the prospectus of the bond that you purchase. And everybody who purchases bonds is giving bond prospectus. And once along the line,
what do you make
to know that.
Of the posture? We're in Washington. We have a document with the IMF. We're now coming back. The president is engaging, and he's telling us that apart from solving the immediate issues of profiteering and speculation in the market, it's also to collate views and adapt. I'm thinking, where are they? And the team is coming back to Ghana at the staff level. We want that agreement, and quickly we'll get to the board. So shouldn't we have been doing that before now?
Well, I you know, that area is not my strong suit, and for me, the negotiation thing, I can only just oppose it to business. When you're having a business negotiation, I think when it drags, okay, there's a back and forth.
Do you feel that it's dragging?
Oh yes, it should have. For me, like I said, I don't know how that IMF government process works. But when you're looking at to gain confidence and rapidly institute a process, because bear in mind, every time that this process is not concluded, the dollar to the cedi is suffering. The announcement alone did not have the desired effect. People want to see the nitty-gritty of what is negotiated. People want to see the inflow. In the past, we've had announcement of going to IMF and it stabilized our currency. In this time round, we've done the announcement, and about 2 weeks ago, we lost a cedi a day for 5 days, okay? Then last week, it has stabilized. This week, we are still not sure where it's going to go. The most important thing is that there isn't a hard currency in the system. And the reason the fuel price is going up and all those things are high is because accessibility to the FX is not available. And that is why you see the high prices at the pump. So the conversation going on is at the end of it to get IMF to basically give us some liquidity, help us with debt sustainability and all that we do to calm the market, and we go. The market is sort of calm, but the reality on the ground is that the FX is not in the market.
Okay.
The issue of the syndicated loans from the cocoa syndication loan, I'm told, will come in this year. But government alone can't solve this problem, because no matter amount the dollars you bring into the market, there's a market to absorb it. You need investor confidence in. And that's where I would have thought that this process, in terms of a tentative agreement, will have agreed with them quickly, so that the whole this issue of this haircut would not even have come in, because right after DC, we would have had what we need to do, and the speculators would have now stayed away, because we can show them a document that this is what we've negotiated and this is what is going to be. Then the actual agreement will probably be in December after the because now, if you look at the way I understand it, whatever has been agreed has to be inputted in the budget. The budget is between the 15th and the 30th, based on what we hear from Parliament.
It has to be in November, certainly.
Yes, this month. Between 15th or 30th, between that time, we need to have the budget. So whatever in the next 2 weeks, we are going to hear something that has been agreed. So all those things, for me, will give confidence. And two things are needed in this market now to stop and bring the fuel prices down and basically reduce the FX is confidence in the economy and liquidity of FX in the market.
Within the corridors of the minority.
First of all, doctor says something that's not correct.
What did he say that's not correct?
He said something about the
He's an advisor to the vice president.
No, he said something about the E-levy to and fro. What caused the wrangling was about the percentage point. We said no E-levy. Then eventually our leader went to commit to say that the minority will be willing to support the 1 percentage point E-levy. They said no way. They stood on their high grounds at 1.75 for nearly 2 months. It was not really about taxing the merchant-to-merchant transactions. Hold on.
Who did the law?
No.
You did the act.
No.
Okay.
Doctor, you projected your revenue for the year from E-levy
in the drafting, in the drafting of the act. You insisted on this.
Kept
That
quiet.
is how come all of this was spelled out in the act.
I sat in nearly all the meetings with Parliament, including when Finance Minister himself came. There was no point that taxing the transaction between merchants and merchants became an issue.
So who finally did the act?
What was an issue was the percentage point, which your Finance Minister said he will refuse. He won't come down to even 1.2.
That was not the issue you guys
That was the issue.
That is how come the act went down to exactly that.
Now you're saying that the compromise at Parliament could have been that you guys would have agreed to pass the whole thing, including merchant to merchant at 1%. Would Parliament would have agreed?
Is that what the president? That was not it. That was not the
This was the bill you brought, and that was a component of it. Our concern was the percentage points. And our leader had gone to commit us at 1%, which we were willing to go with him. But as soon as they decided, they even told him that he doesn't speak for government.
Okay.
So he should shut up. Okay. So we decided that no, that's a zero rated tax.
Okay.
They disagreed. So that is why for at all times material, their projected revenue for the year stood at 5.9 billion, if you recall. If indeed they are taking out the component of merchant-to-merchant transaction, they wouldn't have been staying with the 5.9 billion projected revenue. They would have realized that component alone would have taken a chunk out of the revenue.
Point made.
So if he says that and
you've clarified
and says that Parliament is the cause, I disagree totally with him. Then two. He said it's important that we restructure the debt. I am asking them, when they restructured the debt earlier 4 years ago and got breathing space and took so much money, we want to see the revenues that those monies are bringing in. We want to see it. It's not again, and so the debt must be restructured to give them a breather. Nobody wants to trust them again. Nobody trusts the finance minister. Nobody trusts the minister.
Is that why you want the finance minister to go?
Himself, the governor of the central bank must go. The minister in charge of finance, at the Ministry of Finance, Dubois himself must go. The entire economic management team must go. Kojo spoke about trust. People just don't trust the team at the helm of affairs any longer. So no matter what we do, if we don't see new players running affairs for government, there will be no trust in the system.
Okay.
So just a quick point.
No,
I
wanted to go for a break.
I understand. You see, Honorable wants to. What
Are you going back to E-levy?
We say they say we are making noise.
On the debt, he's talking about
everything we say, they say now we are making noise.
Why the build up after debt reprofiling? You need to disaggregate the debt built up and see that a chunk of the debt was built up from 2001 up to now, 2020 coming up to now, okay? And that explains the huge expenditures government had to make after COVID.
Dr. Gida, what was the debt in January 2017?
122 billion.
Okay.
122.
What was the debt now?
It's around 4+.
So why are you mentioning 2001?
Oh, you see, if you do that, you're not being fair to the system. What I'm saying is that he's talking about why the build-up. And I'm saying that you, in all of this analysis, you need to, granulate the whole thing and decompose them and see the build-up. I'm not going to 2016 or anything, even in government. And then you know at what point, if you plot the graph, you know where the chunk of the build-up came, and then you have the explanation to that. Is what I'm trying to.
Okay, I get
say.
your point now. We're taking a break. When we come back, we'll have the smaller conversation. Why do we incrementally see ordinary Ghanaians complaining that prices of goods and services are going up? Just 2 days ago, when one of those transport terminals, so we'll pose a question to Mr. Kojo Poku here. Are we going to see continuation of fares increasing at the lorry stations? We'll be right back.